Hey everyone, welcome back to Pine Hollow Auto Diagnostics. It is time. It's time to swap the transmission in my 1989 Mazda MPV. It has 243,000 miles on it and quite a few rust holes. But hey, it's better to have a running functional vehicle than a vehicle that's not quite right. And right now it still runs. It drove in here. It's just missing second gear. And the torque converter shutters, and it's just, sometimes it shifts kind of weird. We're just replacing the transmission because I got this guy, a low mileage. The junkyard said it was 80,000 miles on it for, I think it was 350 bucks or so with shipping. Comes with a dipstick. So I guess you can't go wrong here. The only thing that's kind of annoying is, they snipped all the lines off, and these lines are actually in much better shape than the ones under the truck right now. Those are all rusty and crusty, so I want to at least use what's left of these, maybe cut these off, put a little flare on there, and clamp some new transmission hoses on to make that work. Just as a preliminary check of the fluid in here, you can see it is black, nasty. The level's good, but I have done a transmission fluid flush here a couple times over the lifetime of the vehicle, and each time that I did the flush, it would shift really poorly. So this transmission has been pretty worn since, 100,000 miles ago. But if you don't change the fluid, then it gets better and better until, well, finally crapped out. But the friction material in the clutches gets into the fluid and actually makes it, more sticky or something. So sometimes on the old transmissions, it's better to leave the fluid in and just let it, do its thing as long as it can. So we'll drain that out. It'll probably look like black sludge, and then go from there. We have to remove this carrier bearing along with the drive shaft. It's a whole assembly. So let's see if this bolt will be friendly. It's not bad. See that guy is there. Already got these guys out in the back. Let's remove those. It's probably gonna fall on my face here. Now that's off, and this should just slide right out. Sweet. Looks like a bench press. Hooah! Awesome. Driveshaft is on the ground. Next thing I want to do is remove the torque converter bolts before we get too far. Oh, I remember this thing. It has more bolts holding it in. All the way up there. Yeah. So there's two here, two that I removed going in that way, and then all the way up in the corner. Let me get those with a swivel. So we got the cover off, and now I'm using my favorite Pittsburgh Harbor Freight ratchet with a long 14mm socket, and you don't even need to hold the crankshaft because as you turn the wrench, it just kind of bumps up against the oil pan there, and it should be able to crack the bolts loose, no problem. And actually, once you get them started, they spin out pretty easy. Definitely easier to get out than those ones on the Rogue CVT, which were either glued or Loctited or something. Those broke free really hard. And now to rotate the engine, you just take your pry bar and go like that until you get to the next one. And here's the next one right here. Nice. So now that's done. Next plan of action is to, I guess we can get this steering linkage or shift linkage off. It's a long bar that goes all the way up to the steering column across here. It's all adjustable, and I think I'll just pop it off at this park neutral safety switch, which has been rewired, re-riveted like 3 or 4 times because the contacts in there corrode, and then it becomes a no crank, no start. And then I think we'll just pop these crossmember bolts off, lower this thing, and go for the wiring and the hoses. Alright, so we got the linkage disconnector right here. Is just a 21mm nut. And now this contraption looks like 2 bolts hold it up here, and it's looking real angry on these 2 bolts. So I don't know, let's undo these guys and see if it can drop out and kind of move out of the way. The less rusty fasteners we have to deal with, the better. Or you loosen these guys up. It's a 12. Well, I guess you never know till you try. We got very lucky that these bolts are coming out easy. Unbelievable, because you would think if it lives in this environment, it wouldn't have a chance. And that guy is also loose. So we're going to take this whole bracket assembly off, and up there I think we can break it loose from the main steering column shaft right at that the nut. So let's try to do that. Well, here it is. The only other thing I have to do is pop out this little cotter pin, take it out of the steering column shaft, but holy mackerel, look at this thing. They have to engineer and design every little bit of linkage and attachment points, and look at this like U-joint pivot thing. That's nuts. I mean, nowadays you just push a button and I think most transmissions, well, I mean, there are shift cables, but there's a lot of electronic controls too. But this is kind of excessive, I'd say. Kind of silly, but it works. And even though these rubber boots have seen better days, there's no play in the joints, so they just built it to last. All right, here we go. Jack is ready. Get some of these bolts out of here. 1, 2. They look bad on the surface, but the threads are really nice, so I guess water didn't get in there and wreak havoc. 2 more. It's a little tight. Might as well spray it down. does it. Well, one thing that is holding us back, there's a solid mount between the downpipe and the transmission. So when we try to pivot the whole thing down, obviously the exhaust here, well, it's kind of held in place by various homemade attachments. But anyways, we need to take off this clamp here, and those two bolts have to come out anyways, get rid of this, and then the whole assembly can pivot down. Well, the engine's still going to pivot down. I guess we have to take off the downpipe. That's kind of a pain. I don't want to disturb this beauty. Let's think that through. Alright, now that we have the downpipe disconnected from the exhaust manifold, let's try lowering this transmission again. See how that goes. Alright, I like it. Now we have all kinds of access room to get to this harness, these connectors over here, and the oil cooler lines. We'll take the starter out. That's all kind of straightforward. So we're moving right along, taking out the Bellhousing bolts. This is where it gets interesting. On the right side, let's see if we can get this camera shot. You can see I already took all the bolts out, and they're actually quite easy to get to. There's plenty of room on the right side here. You can sneak in there with an extension and breaker bar, crack them loose, get them out. On this side, however, things are tight. Can't really get, well, I got those two. Remember, the exhaust pipe was being held by that clamp, but then we have two more right up there, 14 and a 17. Now for this, I have to connect every extension that I had, and now's the time when you realize you don't have enough extensions, because this is like the only real access to those two nuts. And if you use, a 3/8 extension versus 1/2 inch, this will twist and bend, and kind of make it a pain. But I got the 14mm crack loose, and then from here, it's pretty straightforward. You just take your driver, spin it out, there you go. There's our bolt. That was the 14mm. Now we have one more all the way over there. It's a 17. That guy. The rest of them are out. Well, plus I'm going to leave these for last. We got two down here for the support bracket and two on the other side, 14mm. So let's try to get this 17 big boy out. So that last big bolt, we snuck in here with a breaker bar and a short 17 and a cheater bar and actually cracked it loose. So it should be easier to get out from under there. Yeah, it's definitely turning now. Whew. So that's the path of least resistance right there. Alright, transmission is ready to come out. I like to call this floor jack acrobatics. So we got two floor jacks facing each other, holding the transmission up, lengthwise. So, and we have one bolt left right there to take out. And there's actually already a gap forming, so that's good. It's not seized against the engine. So I'm going to set the camera up here and hope for the best. Hopefully it won't get in the way. So first let's take the last bolt out. Don't need that. Now, let's see, set this guy up a little better. Right about there. Okay, the transmission is already separating from the engine, which is awesome. Hopefully the exhaust heat shield won't get in the way there. So all we have to do is pull this whole shebang back. Awesome, yes. Now let's see if the torque converter separated. It did. Basically home free. This is actually pretty awesome. Now the dipstick tube is still up there. I didn't disconnect it just because I didn't feel like it. Let's see if it comes out with the transmission. Get over here, lower this guy down a little bit. Right about there. Sweet. That's fantastic. All right, let's keep lowering her little by little. So there's not much weight on the rear jack here. See, I can pivot it on the main support. Let's keep coming down. Hopefully it won't tilt to the left. Stop right there. This transmission is actually probably weighs half as much as the CVT. Watch out, not too hasty. I can see the comments already. I bet some strong guys gonna be like, "Oh, I can just bench press that in place." Yeah, probably. That's it. Under the MPV. Never seen this sight before. Flex plate. Everything's covered in oil, but I think what was happening is, see up top, there's the little seal there for the camshaft valve cover. This is all wet. All migrates down, just makes a mess. Now I did replace the valve cover gasket, a few months ago. So this is just residual oil, migrating down. It's not dripping anymore, so I feel like I fixed the leak, but I guess we'll wipe this stuff off a little bit just to make sure the mating surface is nice and clean. Blow it out with compressed air. Kind of a funky design. There's this almost like a sandwich plate between the transmission and the engine block. Yep. So that's that. Guess we'll clean this guy up and get to work putting in the new transmission. One more thing to note, check this out. It's actually a factory cover plate. This van could have been a manual transmission back in 1989. So they actually had a manual transmission option. I know in '89 you could get either the V6 or the 4-cylinder, only 2-wheel drive, but with an automatic or manual transmission. Then in 1990 they added the 4-wheel drive option, and you can get, you know, if you had 4-wheel drive, obviously you had the V6, but you could still get a stick shift 4-wheel drive with a low range, and that's like the, you know, cream of the crop, most desirable MPV out there. And they continued that until '92, at which point they dropped the manual transmission, and then in '95 I believe they dropped the 4-cylinder, so then you can only get V6 automatic 2 or 4-wheel drive. But yeah, they don't make this anymore. So my dream at one point was to actually make this thing a manual transmission, and I thought this would be a good excuse to do it, but just looking at all the logistics, not worth it. I mean, you have to get, you know, all the clutch parts and flywheel and master slave cylinders, the pedals, and you know, those manual versions were so rare, you can't really find all those parts anymore. And then, I mean, look at this thing. Is it worth putting all that money into it? No, but a used automatic transmission just to make it run a few more years, I think that is worth it. So that's what we're doing. Oh, and the other variable is the rear axle for the manual transmission had a different ratio. So if you put just the transmission in without changing that ratio on the highway, it's gonna, you know, rev out, and it's not gonna be nice to take on a long trip. So with the automatic, you know, we're not changing anything. So I guess that's the that's the way to go here.